Good morning, everybody. So we'll continue our talks on refuge, specifically as it relates to the refuge ngondro practice that we've been doing here. And I think the retreat from afar folks are about to start very soon. So today, since we have a lot of people here who haven't been here for these teachings, I will describe the whole visualization. So we'll do what we used to do at the beginning. We'll have a little time of sitting for a moment in meditation. I'll set the motivation at the very beginning. Then we'll do the refuge visualization. We'll spend a little time on the mantra. Then we'll do the recitations that if you have a blue book, maybe they're all open to the right page. They'll be on page 23. Then we'll do the mantra. And then we'll, in the spot where it says probably in the book, do your Lama meditation. Then we'll do the talk on the precepts of having taken refuge. Okay. Yep, everybody got a book that needs a book, that has to have a book? Okay. So let's just take a moment to bring yourself to this room. We do have assistive listening devices. Oh, Val's got one. Okay, we're good. And that's about as close as this mic gets. So if you still can't hear me, I recommend you put some on. So start by bringing your attention to your body. And then to your breathing. And let your mind settle from whatever immediately preceded this session. Talks, discussions, comments, ideas, work that needed to be done, work that had to be interrupted. Bring your mind present here right now with the intent to turn our attention to our deep refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And think about what that means for you. Bringing in the relationship to the Buddha, your own relationship to Dharma, Sangha, and your connection with your spiritual mentor who has opened the doorway to anything you know about Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, maybe many mentors. And for our motivation this morning, I was continually reflecting on the conflicts in the world today, which might be in the mind of many people, and wondering where in the world is there a teaching that is based in harming no living being, none whatsoever, not for any reason. It's true that there are, I would say probably every religious or spiritual tradition teaches kindness and developing love and compassion. We know that. And yet it's almost everyone that I know of, there are exceptions. No harm unless it's provoked. No harm inside our own group, but outside of that, the rules don't necessarily apply. Where is there a teaching that says unequivocally, harming living beings results totally in our own suffering, whereas being of benefit creates happiness for us and for them as well? And how amazing the world would be if that were the guideline for living beings. So much of the suffering we experience, not just at the hands of others, but at very subtle ways, our own minds, creating the causes that just continually make us unhappy. Because our afflictions take over the mind, and our wish to be of benefit, which is also there, is so easily overshadowed by our protection of the self. So as we think about the sufferings of cyclic existence, the suffering of pain, the suffering of change, pervasive compounded suffering, it's that very subtle one, that bottom line misconception of how things are, how things truly exist, not in the way that they appear, that makes us grasp at this self and lash out at anything that is other, that might cause pain or discomfort, mildly or in truly horrific and barbaric ways. It's true, these things happen. They happen as a result of the afflictions completely unchecked, wrong views that don't understand the causes of happiness. And their result, according to the teachings on karma, is only just more suffering, and more profound than they're experiencing now. And how can we have anything but compassion for that condition? Over and over and over, we create the causes of the very thing we do not want. And when I look at the world, I think it is like a miracle. Of course, we know there are no miracles per se, but it is like a miracle to have met a teaching that teaches the opposite of that. And so if the sufferings of wars and famine and so forth touch our hearts, the deepest compassion that can arise is a wish to free all beings, not just from that, but from the causes of it, from the wrong views that allow it to grow and prosper. And that requires us to deepen our refuge, deepen our understanding, and to the best of our abilities at the time that we have, where we are in our practice, to work against our own afflicted minds, cultivate love and compassion for other living beings, and keep our bottom line precepts to harm no living being. So with that intention, with that wish to deepen our understanding of the teachings of the refuge that liberate us and gives us the capacity to help liberate all beings, we'll do this practice and this session today. So visualize before me amidst an ocean of Samantabhadra offerings, in the middle of a spacious throne of precious gems, is a smaller, radiant, jeweled throne. On cushions of variegated lotus, sun, and moon is my root spiritual mentor, appearing in the aspect of Shakyamuni Buddha, with a body of pure gold radiating light, is adorned with a crown protrusion, and the Buddha's left hand is in the gesture of meditation. His right hand is in the earth-touching gesture on his knee, touching the earth. He sits in the Vajra cross-legged position, wearing the 3 brilliant saffron robes of a monastic. Rays brighter than the sun radiate from his body in the 10 directions. Eyes never tire of his resplendent form with its perfect vivid signs and marks, and ears never tire of his enchanting speech with its 60 melodies. His vast and profound mind is a treasure of knowledge and love, whose depth is beyond measure. Free from all stains of imperfection, he is the consummation of all good qualities. The mere recollection of the Buddha dispels the anxieties of cyclic existence and self-complacent peace. He displays manifold amazing powers like the 12 deeds to tame beings in countless worlds. So visualize that light body of the Buddha. And for those who want the simple visualization, just hold that as mind in mind as the embodiment of the 3 jewels. As I lead the more extensive visualization of the refuge field. So in the space to the Buddha's right sits Maitreya. He's surrounded by the spiritual mentors of the lineage of extensive deeds. In the space to his left sits Manjushri, and the spiritual mentors of the lineage of the profound view. In front of Shakyamuni Buddha is my own spiritual mentor in the aspect of giving teachings, surrounded by all the spiritual mentors with whom I have a Dharma connection. All of them seated on cushions of lotus, sun, and moon. In the space behind Buddha Shakyamuni is Vajradhara, blue, victorious lord of myriad tantras, surrounded by the lineage of spiritual mentors of the blessings of the practice. In the 4 directions around Buddha Shakyamuni and his retinue sit Guhya Samaja, Chakrasambhara, Vajrabhairava, and Kalachakra with their mandalas. And then beyond these are the circles of meditational deities, Buddhas, Bodhisattvas. Here are arhats and solitary realizer arhats, dakas and dakinis, Dharma protectors. And then in the 4 directions off of that central throne are 4 directional protectors in innumerable peaceful and forceful aspects. On either side of the lineage spiritual mentors who conferred empowerment, teachings, and instructions of the Vinaya, Sutra, and Abhidharma and Tantra are splendid stands with their teachings of the holy Dharma, represented by brilliant, radiant texts. Thus all of space is filled with objects of refuge. So hold that in mind, this huge light force, holy beings in the space in front, filling all of space. And then surrounding me are gathered all the beings of the 6 realms, overwhelmed by the various difficulties and sufferings of samsara. And so in the face of these constantly recurring problems, aware of the dangers of cyclic existence, and confidence in the 3 jewels of Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha to guide us, along with the spiritual mentors, we seek protection and we take refuge. So we start. Namo Guru Bhya, Namo Buddhaya, Namo Dharmaya, Namo Sanghaya, Namo Gurubhya, Namo Buddhaya, Namo Dharmaya, Namo Sanghaya, Namo Gurubhya, Namo Buddhaya, Namo Dharmaya, Namo Sanghaya. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by engaging in generosity and the other far-reaching practices, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by engaging in generosity and the other far-reaching practices, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by engaging in generosity and the other far-reaching practices, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and its causes. May all sentient beings be free of suffering and its causes. May all sentient beings not be separated from sorrowless bliss. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and anger. Reverently, I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind, and present clouds of every type of offering, actual and mentally transformed. I confess all my destructive actions accumulated since beginningless time, and rejoice in the virtues of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until cyclic existence ends, and turn the wheel of Dharma for sentient beings. I dedicate all the virtues of myself and others to the Great Awakening. This ground anointed with perfume, flowers and offer to you. May all beings enjoy this pure land. The objects of attachment, aversion, and ignorance, friends, enemies, and strangers, my body, wealth, and enjoyments, I offer these without any sense of loss. Please accept them with pleasure and inspire Mandalakam Niryatayami. And we'll do some mantra recitation for a while. So if it's the first time you've been doing this practice, go back to the very beginning of the recitations, page 23. And you can recite that very first Namo Guruvya, Namo Buddhaya, Namo Dharmaya, Nama Sanghaya, over and over and over. This is the mantra of refuge. And you can visualize that light is coming from this whole array of holy beings in the space in front, or the Buddha, if that's all you've imagined, pouring into you and pouring to all living beings around us. First bringing white light to purify all our negativities, and then bringing golden light that brings the realizations of their pure and perfect minds, especially of the Buddha, all their realizations of those on the way to becoming pure and perfect Buddhas. Those of you who have been doing retreat, then do the mantra recitation as it fits for where you are with your practice. We'll do this just a short time. Namo Guruvya, Namo Buddhaya, Namo Dharmaya, Namo Sanghaya, Namo Namo Guru Buddhaya, Namo Dharmaya, Namo Sanghaya. Okay. Lama Tsongkhapa tells us in Lamrim Chenmo, since it is certain that you will die soon, you cannot remain in this life. As you do not cease to exist after death, you will be reborn. Furthermore, you will be reborn in either a happy place or a miserable realm, because there is no birthplace other than these two types of beings, happy or miserable. Since you are controlled by your karma and cannot choose where you will be reborn, you will be reborn in the matter in which your virtuous and non-virtuous karma impel you to be reborn. This being the case, contemplate the suffering of the miserable realms, thinking, how would it be if I were born in a miserable realm? And that, without question, without reflection, then we turn our minds to taking refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. That's why we do it. So as we've been going through this, we've been pretty much closely following Lama Tsongkhapa's outline in the section on taking refuge in the Lamrim Chenmo. So we've looked at the causes for taking refuge. This, what I just read, this quote being the first and the principal one. But then we have to have confidence in the three jewels as a refuge to guide us. And much of what we've been looking at is to create that confidence. And then the third one is for a Mahayana practitioner to also be concerned with the suffering of all living beings as a cause for taking refuge. So we looked at that. We looked at the base of the objects which you go for refuge, identifying those objects. We looked at some of the reasons why they are worthy to be objects of refuge. We went through going for refuge by knowing their good qualities. Last week we covered going for refuge by knowing the distinctions between them, which is pretty rich, I found it. And so today we're going into the fourth point here is guidelines and precepts once you've taken refuge. Having gone refuge, there's a whole series of precepts that are not the precepts that we all have. It's a whole different set of precepts. And so these I want to go through in the blue book. It was interesting because we've been following this Lama Tsongkhapa outline so closely. I think they're on page 88. Thank you. We've been following Lama Tsongkhapa's outline pretty closely. And when I got to this, I really got confused, which was helpful because it made me have to look at every resource to try to figure out what had happened here. But what I think has happened is that Venerable Chodron's outlines here of guidelines for practicing refuge, is on 3 different pages, is in some ways a synthesis of the order that they are in Lama Tsongkhapa's outline, and then of course then in Geshe Sopa's, and then Pabonka Rinpoche's, all the Gelugpa sources I've been looking at are following Lamrim Chenmo. I couldn't find out what her source was, but as I look at them, I see that they are all included in these. So I think in her kind way for her English-speaking Western students, what she's done is make them more digestible for us. So I'm going to follow her outline and then make references based to what I learned from the other side. So these guidelines for the practice of refuge, I mean, you'd think they would make sense after we've taken refuge, but no. They, some of them come from Asanga, and some of them come from the Kadampa masters from the 11th, 12th centuries, you know, the great and fierce, in my mind, practitioners that have laid the groundwork for how Lama Tsongkhapa practiced and all the Gelugpa tradition for sure. So the more we can train in these guidelines, the stronger our refuge is in this life. The stronger our refuge is in this life, the more likely it is to be present when we die. And thus, the more likely it is for us to meet Buddha's teachings in the future lives, and that is really, really important. So I don't know, maybe if you're seeing it, I'm certainly seeing it or reminding it too, as we're doing this retreat and really meditating on these things, to be able to bring that Buddha Dharma Sangha, be able to bring our refuge to mind continually throughout the day, keeps it rich and vivid. And that's the kind of familiarity, as we've been talking about week after week, that's the kind of familiarity we want to have so that at the moment of death, it is there. That there is no doubt or question about what we're going to do. We will turn to refuge. And if we can't stop and do the taking and giving meditation, if we can't generate ourselves as the deity, we can't meditate on emptiness as we're dying, if we can take refuge, they say, we will be in great shape for actually taking a fortunate rebirth. Because why? Those are the conditions. What happens at the time of death is the condition of our mind is what provides, well, or the state of our mind is what provides the condition for our karma to ripen and throw us into the next rebirth. So a virtuous mind that is holding refuge in mind no matter what happens is creating virtuous conditions for that virtuous karma to ripen. So taking refuge, as we've said all along, is like the whole path, and it's also preparing us for our future lives. And also taking refuge, looking about refuge and precepts, taking refuge formally is the foundation for any other precepts we take. Whether you're taking the 5 lay precepts or any of the 5 lay precepts, whether you take the 8 one-day precepts, whether you take the monastic level precepts of any type, bodhisattva precepts, ethical restraints, that's all based on taking refuge. All the taking tantric initiation is based on taking refuge. This refuge is the very, very foundation of all of the different precepts that we take. It's like, this is my picture, I didn't get this from the scriptures, but it's like it gets narrower and narrower and narrower. The more precepts we take, the path gets clearer and clearer and clearer. This is the guideline by which we practice. When I was in India last summer, one of the Kenmos gave a talk, and I didn't get the master's name. I want to do some research on this. And if we have any, we do have Kagyu nuns here, right? Somebody can tell me that there is a Kagyu master from way back who teaches very clearly that the Buddha's intent is actually that we try to live by the precepts of a fully ordained monastic. That's the fundamental, clearest way of holding and moving forward along the path. And out of course, great compassion, the Buddhist gave us lots of, steps along the way. But I want to look this up and check into it, because it's a very interesting theory. I don't think I think he's unique in that presentation, but it's an interesting presentation. To me, it just showed the value of precepts and how we treasure all the ones that we have, whatever we have. And so here we have this whole list of precepts that isn't even on the list of precepts that we already have, if you have the 5 lay precepts or whatever. Okay, so as I said, some of them come from a Sangha, some of them come from the Kadampa masters, but here we go. She says, having taken refuge, a safe and sound direction in the 3 jewels, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, it is advantageous to follow certain guidelines for practice in order to make progress along the path to awakening. In an analogy to taking refuge in the Buddha, commit yourself wholeheartedly to a qualified spiritual mentor. So what is that analogy, do you think? Like, how is that an analogy? Yeah.
Is it the idea that our teachers and our spiritual mentors teach us, even though we don't have the Buddha in our life right now physically, they teach us as if the Buddha were here. So
Yeah. The Buddha's not here in form that we can access. Who can give us these teachings if it's not the Buddha? Our teachers. Our teachers are the ones who give us these teachings. And so, Geshe Soba says, without a wise and proper teacher, we don't know how to reach the goal. We don't even know that there is a goal. We don't know there's any such thing. So by relying on our teachers, once we've made the connection, so once we've checked them out, as we talked about a few weeks ago, once we're clear that they have the qualities that we admire and that we can follow and that we can trust, then we truly entrust ourselves to be guided. Not just to trust ourselves to listen to them, but entrust ourselves to be guided by our spiritual mentor or mentors in order to achieve the goal that we say we like. Geshe Sopa says this really clearly. He said, when we say, I take refuge in the Buddha, it means you revere your spiritual mentor as the guide on the Buddha's path. Now, we've talked a lot about how that leap is a little bit hard to make for many. But if we think about more and more, it's like, really, if we think about where in the world did the Dharma that we know come from? Even you've only read lots of books, and only reading lots of books doesn't mean to diminish the quality of lots and lots of books. Those also came from mentors. I mean, we have to acknowledge that we have to rely on other beings to teach us this. I know when I first started practicing, I kind of had it was a certain kind of arrogance, but there was a point in my mind where I think, this is so reasonable. Why don't I already know this? I should already know this. I should have thought of this myself. Oh, now is that arrogant? Beyond the beyond, right? But, some of us have that, I should know this. I don't. I still don't. I didn't. And without that someone opening the door and actually pointing out that I didn't, I'd be nowhere. So different people have different personality problems. That happens to be mine. But, we all rely on that. So just this precepts helps us, I think, a little bit go closer to the ideas that we were talking about last week of how it is, or 2 weeks ago, how it is that we see the teacher as the Buddha. So it's not literal, and yet it's very, very much a representation or an analogy. So we must rely on that. Okay, second one. An analogy to taking refuge in the Dharma. Listen to and study the teachings as well as put them into practice in your daily life. Well, that kind of makes sense too, doesn't it? An analogy to taking refuge in the Dharma. So if we look at the Dharma of, the conventional Dharma, the realizational Dharma, and the scriptural Dharma, and then we look at the ultimate Dharma, the cessations and paths, we can only achieve either one of those if we're looking at it into daily life practice, thinking about it every day. And it's easy to become, this holiness is really honest about being 21st century Buddhists, right? It's very easy to walk into a Dharma center and see Chenrezig, and some people see 1,000 arms and 11 heads and kind of flip out, and some people walk in and go, that's it. Chenrezig is where it's at. And we never much think further than that. So we go to practice every week, we chant our mantras every week, but what is Chenrezig? What is the Buddha of compassion? What does it mean to be the Buddha of compassion? Could I become the Buddha of compassion? How would I become the Buddha of compassion? Those kinds of questions may not ever arise if we don't follow this guideline of taking refuge in the Dharma, listening to and studying the teachings, and then putting them into practice in our daily lives. So often, we all know, anybody that's been around for a while, we see people who come to the Dharma center and they're on fire for a while, and then they disappear. Something happens, they get, something happens in the community and they get irritated, or their feelings get hurt, or the teacher says something that points out something, or life happens, they get married, or they get divorced, or they have a baby, or something happens, and that daily practice of being aware of the Dharma and being able to practice the Dharma evaporates so easily. And what I see is that it just takes so much intention. We are truly swimming upstream. That analogy is so accurate. And if you're going to swim upstream, it's good to swim with a group, and unless you have the capacity to hold that yourself. And so if we don't kind of deepen this, taking the refuge, listening to the Dharma, bringing it into our lives on a daily basis, then when any of those other life things erupt, it's so easy to lose it. And then, of course, we have people come back here and say, oh no, I haven't been here in years, but I'm ready to be back. So it's not like the seed goes away. But if we really want to foster this over a lifetime, this precept is a good one to follow. So then, hello computer, don't do this to me now, thank you. Um, an analogy to taking refuge in the Sangha: respect the Sangha as your spiritual companions and follow the good examples they set. So that means that once we've taken refuge, emulate those who have truly entered the path. That's the Arya Sangha. But here, Venerable says that we're talking here about the monastic Sangha, because that's who we can directly see and emulate. Mhm. Now, there may be people here who are also Arya Sangha, and we don't know that, and we'll don't know. But the conventional Sangha is at least trying to keep their precepts, hopefully keeping their precepts well and living as a good example. Yeah. So we'll get more about the Sangha in the next set. So number 4, avoid being rough and arrogant, running after any desirable object you see and criticizing anything that meets with your disapproval. Duh. I mean, that's huge. This is before we take precepts, right? Avoid being rough and arrogant, running after any desirable object you see and criticizing anything that meets with your disapproval. For people who have been in retreat for the last month, have you noticed how much you want to run after desirable objects and criticize anything that meets with your disapproval? I mean, in the silence, when I can't open my mouth, you just see it's that. And, what I interpret for myself is that, this is that suffering of cyclic existence. That's the mind that's never satisfied. Mind that is never satisfied. Another cup of tea, it's not sweet enough. They have the wrong honey out. Then, it's not warm enough. Now I've waited so long, it's cold. I mean, just one cup of tea, all of this. And then the criticism about who left the tea leaves all over the sink and how come they never wiped this counter. And I criticize. I want, I criticize. I want, I criticize. Anybody have a mind that's not doing that? Could be people haven't seen it yet. That's possible. But nobody's raised their hand. Avoid being rough and arrogant, running after any desirable object you see and criticizing anything that meets with your disapproval. So, as a refuge guideline, it helps us tame our mind, and not just tame. I mean, it is taming our mind. Actually, I was going to say it's about also restraining our behavior. So it comes to that. But this really is about bringing our mind into the mind of Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. Number 5, be friendly and kind to others and be concerned more with correcting your own faults than when pointing out those of others. I think that is the verbalization of the above problem. Be friendly and kind to others. I think we all want to do that. I mean, human beings like human beings in general. Human beings like to be liked in general. Being friendly and kind to others doesn't necessarily come comfortably for everybody, but I think it's true, actually. To be friendly and kind, that's the kind of environment we want to live in, unless we're emotionally injured and are so protected that we can't see that there's friendliness out there, which happens. But then as soon as we get, we run up against any obstacle with a person, there goes friendly and kind. Just like that, on a personal level, on the national level, on the international level, just like that. Venerable Children has some nice advice when she taught this, about this being critical of every other. I think Venerable Sangye Kadro pointed this out too as an anecdote recently. Every time you have the thought, I need to sell somebody to do this a different way, turn the mirror towards yourself and say, how am I behaving and what haven't I done that I should have done? First, we have to notice that we are telling someone they should do something different. I mean, really. Sometimes I just see it in myself. I have to ask myself, is this my job? I may have an opinion about how this should be done. And I have, I will claim some superiority because I've been here longer than most people. So I know how it should be done. That gets worse. The question has to come down to, really, is this my job to have an opinion about this? Is it my business where the laundry gets done? No, I have an opinion about it. But do I need to say that? So that's that one. And then to criticize someone for having made a decision that it follows right away. So here, that her advice here, every time you have the thought, I need to tell somebody to do this a different way, look at yourself. What have I done? What have I done differently than other people didn't like? What happens? She says, instead of having the light shining out there on everybody else, that's what we do. That's because our mind is always looking out, looking out, looking out, looking out. Instead of doing that, turn the mirror on yourself. What about me? What about my behavior? And that's really our job. If you want to ask, what is my job? My job isn't even the one that's on the organization chart. My job is to be looking at my own mind and to being able to correct my behavior with regards to this kind of precept and the other precepts I have. We can't control everybody. Frankly, we can't control anybody, including myself. But what I can do is manage to change myself. So that's where this precept takes us. So that it's a precept of refuge is just so interesting. There's lots of different things that this could come up in any of our precept lists, how we should behave as monastics, how we should behave as lay people. You know, the mind training teachings, it comes up in all kinds of things. But here it is as a precept of refuge. I think that's interesting, yeah. Yeah, okay, the next ones are precepts, thanks. Thank you, yeah. So these are guidelines. You're right, that's correct. After that comes no, those are the precepts, the 5 lay precepts. According to this book, they're called the Precepts of Refuge. 12th chapter, a whole chapter calling them the Precepts of Refuge. So that's what I've been studying. So we'll go with guidelines because that's what she has here. But that's why I think it's interesting. Lama Tsongkhapa, or at least the translators, call it precepts. And so does Geshe Sopa, and he has no qualms about translating Lamrim Chenmo differently than these guys. So how are they precepts? I don't know. But it's stronger in the original text. It's stronger than guidelines. But given that that's what I said we're going to go by, we can go with guidelines. I have to change some of my words here. It helps this mind if I see them as precepts. I'm a little fuzzy with guidelines. But anyway, number 6, as much as possible, avoid the 10 non-virtuous actions and take and keep precepts. So that makes the distinction between guideline and precepts. So we recall what the 10 non-virtuous actions are. I know we do. 3 of body, refraining from killing, taking what hasn't been freely given, refraining from unwise, unkind sexual behavior, refraining from lying, divisive speech, harsh speech, and idle talk. And then the precepts of mind, refraining from covetousness, ill will, what's her other word for that? Malice, and wrong views. Wrong views. So right there, I mean, this is what they teach right away. You take refuge in the Lamrim, and the very next thing you learn karma. Why? Because because once we have taken refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, the first thing we want to do is learn what is the cause of suffering and what is the cause of happiness. And that's where the karma teachings take us. So as soon as we take refuge, the Buddha is trying to protect our mind. The teachings are protecting our mind so that we stop, as Venerable Thubten says, we stop being a jerk, but it's way bigger than being a jerk. We stop creating the causes for our own suffering, and we start to learn what the causes for happiness are. And we do it in that way. And then, taking precepts, then we do this list of precepts that we wish to take to the extent that we can, taking the 5 lay precepts, taking monastic precepts, taking the 1-day precepts as often as we can, or the 8 Mahayana precepts. It's actually different practice, but same precepts. All guide our behavior in a way that moves us towards our goal of liberation and awakening. And then number 7, have a compassionate and sympathetic heart towards all other sentient beings. So this is an important guideline to deepen and maintain our refuge. You know, we can easily, I think, say, oh, I love Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. I love and admire my teacher as long as they're telling me what I want to hear. But sentient beings, right? I know a nun who was a minister for a long time. She was in some southern church, I can't remember what. But she really loved God, but now she's a Buddhist nun. She really loved God, but her problem was other beings. I mean, she just couldn't, people were a hard nut for her to crack. And as a minister, of course, she realized that wasn't exactly appropriate. So as she began to look for ways to open her heart to other living beings, she met the Dharma and eventually gave up being a minister and is now a Buddhist nun and doing all kinds of things. She's got a place in North Carolina. But it's a funny story, I thought, because in the Buddha Dharma is where she learned, that particular person learned to start to care for living beings. So to keep our refuge pure, that's what Venerable says. We have to keep a compassionate and sympathetic heart towards other living beings with whom we share this path. That's true for practitioners in the Mahayana, but also it's very, very, very strong in the Theravada and in the fundamental vehicle too. Very strong. Did you raise your hand or you just wouldn't know? Yeah, okay. And then number 8, make special offerings to the 3 jewels on Buddhist holidays. So the main 4 on the Tibetan calendar are the sort of starting the full moon of the first month is the Day of Miracles that we celebrate. There's a whole 15 days of miracles, and that culminate in this Day of Miracles that we celebrate, or the Buddha showed an enormous display of miracle powers to help quell here it says heretics, anyway, some arrogant beings who became his disciples after that. Then there's Vesak Day, follows that, which is the anniversary or the commemoration of the Buddha's birth, enlightenment, and parinirvana. The 7 weeks after that is the day which the Buddha taught, the wheel-turning day, where the Buddha gave his first teaching, without which we would be in a dark world. And then in the fall, the descent from the God realm, where the Buddha really wanted to repay the kindness of his birth mother, who passed away 7 days after he was born. And so, seeing that she was in the God realm, he went there to teach her the Dharma, and stayed for 3 months. And his disciples on the ground were disconcerted. He just disappeared. And so the ones with concentration powers could see where he was. So they cured, Magadhyana and Shariputra, I think, were the 2 who calmed everybody down and said, no, the Buddha's fine. He's in the God realm. He's teaching his mother. But they made supplication to ask him please to come back. And so the day that he did return is celebrated. in this way. Yeah. There's a long section in here on how to make these offerings, which is really beautiful. We're not going to do it today, but we may get to it next week. Very helpful. So then there are guidelines in terms of each of the 3 jewels. So the way Venerable has it here, so the way it's divided in Lamrim Chenmo is that there's the series of the don'ts, and then there's the series of the do's, according to each of the 3 objects of refuge. The way Venerable has recategorized them, we get the do and the don't with regard to each of the 3 refuges. So that's what we'll do it that way. So in having taken refuge in the Buddha, who has purified all defilements and developed all excellent qualities, do not turn for refuge to worldly deities who lack the capacity to guide you from all problems. So that would seem obvious, and yet there's a wonderful story in here, the quote from Geshe Badawa, who says, when people have listened to the Buddha, they study the Dharma, they know what the teachings are, and then they go to some psychic who gives them a reading about what their year is going to be like next year, right? And they listen intently. And if they don't do what the psychic told them they should do to avoid the problems, they stress out tremendously and wonder if they should have and should they, and they go, and take great pains to make sure that they do what the psychic told them in order to have a happy life. He said, the Buddha already told us. How much are we following? Are we doing this as intently as we do when we follow the psychics? It's a good question. It's a very good question. It's the same thing with, we don't do that here so much, but when people are making offerings to the protectors, in different, it happens in the Chinese tradition too, doesn't it? Yeah, lots and lots of offerings to the protectors. But Buddha kind of falls aside, maybe because it's more immediate. So we have to think about what has the quality to truly guide us. And that's not to say, and they're very clear about this in the teachings, it's not to say that we don't seek that support if we need it, but we understand what it is. It's not a refuge, right? So, we have been, even from the Tibetan community has been relying on Mo's to try to find out what's going on with Geshe Dado. That's relying in a way that is not taking refuge in that Mo, but is also using the resource of the powers of the Lama that's throwing the dice, or however they do it. I don't even know how it's done. Right, so you hear the distinction that it can be used, it's not a refuge. In His Holiness says, human beings need to often think that the amulets and the blessed water and the protection strings that you get at the at initiations and stuff is the thing that will protect you. That's the mistake in taking refuge in something that isn't taking refuge in the Buddha Dharma Sangha. And he says, in fact, human beings need to protect the amulets, strings, and so forth because they're easily damaged. It's the other way around. On the other hand, if you wear blessing cords and that reminds you of your refuge, that's something else. So it's what's happening in our own mind. Do we direct our mind to taking refuge in this object to protect me? Or do we take that object to remind me of what my refuge is? And it's easy to do because this is tangible. And the refuge of my own mind, I have to keep bringing my mind back to it again, again, again to remember. Okay, so that's the don't in respect to the Buddhas. The do, it's funny that's on this list this way. Respect all images of the Buddha, that's still the do. It's the do's and don'ts are mixed up in this one. So respect all images of the Buddha. And For Lama Zopa Rinpoche, I listed some of his list too, is he says we really look at even the statues as though they were Buddha, not because it all that we are worshiping statues, not at all. But again, the reminder of what a Buddha is. We use that image, we use the paintings, we use all of these as a reminder of the incredible qualities of the Buddha that we cannot access directly. And so these images remind us again and again and again. And it's not because the statue needs us to bow, and it's not even because the Buddha needs us to bow, but it is for the sake of our own humility, for the sake of our own cultivation of receptivity to these teachings, that we cultivate this relationship to the Buddha. That's why we don't put them on the floor. We don't put them in dirty or low places, even if they're just being stored. You know, we get the guidance once in a while to get them off the floor and put them up high. And even if they do have to be stored on the floor, something so huge that it can't be moved, then put something else under it. It doesn't go directly on the floor. The other thing is that we, when looking at various images, do not discriminate about what is beautiful and what is not. Don't point your feet towards the Buddhas. In the same way you put your feet on the desk if you went in for a job interview, right? It's the same kind of respect. Don't earn them, sell them for collateral, or don't make money off selling them. So that gets a little bit tricky with the Dharma shops. I know, who's from FPMT? Lama Zopa has really clear guidelines about how those Dharma shops should be done, but I don't know their mechanism. Do you? Yeah, it's written out so that it's clear that they are not selling them for profit, that they are selling them for benefiting other beings and so forth. And then, having taken refuge in the Dharma, avoid harming any living being. Avoid harming any living being. So, when we think about the conventional and the scriptural Dharma, and we think about the ultimate Dharma jewel, do you think of non-harming? In the conventional samya, it sounds more like the wisdom side to you, kind of where mind goes. Yeah. Well, it's just this is the absolute bottom line of Buddha's teachings, right here. And this took me back to remember when Geshe Dadul was teaching on the 108 verses of in praise of great compassion about 2 years ago. There was a whole section that has stayed with me. There's a verse 11 that says, all of the Buddha's teachings which have the nature of nonviolence are informed by means of compassion. Thus you, compassion, are the quality that makes the Dharma the Dharma. Great compassion is the quality that makes the Dharma the Dharma. And then Geshe told us the story that in Aryadeva's 400, when he was debating with a non-Buddhist, Aryadeva was asked to define Dharma. Then after rejecting all other concepts, he said, ultimately non-harm. Harmlessness is the nature of Dharma. And non-harm is not defined by how it looks from the outside, it's where it comes from, pointing to the mental state out of which it comes. So having taken refuge in the Dharma, avoid harming any living being. That's the bottom line. And if we look at what compelled the Buddha to become Buddha, Dharmakirti spends a lot of time proving that it was compassion that compelled the Buddha to become Buddha. Compassion, great compassion, eons of compassion is what led the Buddha to become the teacher, etc., etc., etc. So I think this is so beautiful. Having taken refuge in the Dharma, avoid harming any living being. That's the bottom line. Everything grows from that. That's what these teachings are saying. It's not the whole picture. Ultimately, I mean, just having this will not take you to liberation and awakening. But having this takes us toward all the other practices that lead to it. Yeah.
What comes to my mind is the three principal aspects of the path. So whether you're aiming for liberation or Buddhahood, you have to stop harming. You know, we avoid the 10 non-virtues to create causes for a good rebirth.
Yeah.
And going further with that for liberation, personal liberation. And then, of course, there's great compassion for the Mahayana path. And I think you would have that text that he was quoting, the verse that you read would be from a Mahayana text. He's talking about the Mahayana Dharma there.
Yeah, definitely. But it's right there. I mean, the same three principal aspects are the foundations for all the Dharma practices, all Dharma vehicles. Yeah.
It still gives me some pause to realize that when it says avoid harming any living being, that includes myself. And I have to just remember that over and over again, that I'm included in that.
Yeah, thank you, Ramanima. So then there's another list of things to do. Respect the written words which describe the path by awakening to keeping the text clean and in a high place. And they say that text should be higher than the Buddha's, actually. You know, our Kangyur and Tengyur are up high. Don't step over books. Don't put them on the floor, not even to store them. Don't throw them in the rubbish when they are old. It's best to burn or recycle old Dharma materials. We don't put our malas on our Dharma books. We don't put our coffee cups on our Dharma books. We don't put our watches on our Dharma books. Spectacles, oh yes, spectacles on our Dharma books. What else do we put on our Dharma books? Tissues, yes. Blurredness. Huh? Yeah, robes either, yeah. Books go on top, yeah. A bookmark, I think, is okay. Somebody had a hand back there, was it Tenzin? Yeah, pens.
So sometimes I found it very tricky, especially on computers or iPads that contains Dharma material.
Yeah, it is tricky. It is tricky. That came up in several of the different discussions with Venerable Children too. I mean, it's also, I mean, if we're going to be totally pure about that, then you have a computer for your Dharma material and then all the other stuff is on something else. So that, I don't know, does anybody have a solution to that? She didn't. You treat it as a book in the same sacred way, kind of sacred way. Yeah, Venerable Nawang. Can you pass the microphone back?
I've also been thinking about this issue, and I thought that maybe that while the Dharma is up on the screen, you treat it as Dharma, and when you have a recipe, then you treat it like it has a recipe.
Yeah, that's a nice way of approaching it. Thanks, that's a good guideline. Let's see. All right, then 3, having taken refuge in the Sangha, do not cultivate the friendship of people who criticize the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, or who have unruly behavior or do many harmful actions. By becoming friendly with such people, you may be influenced in the wrong way. However, that does not mean you should criticize or not have compassion for them. That doesn't mean pity, by the way. Compassion for them. So, yeah, we emulate the Sangha. We said that before. Lama Zopa added this. He said, you should avoid discriminating within the Sangha community and have equal respect for all. You know, it's like having your favorite monastic, or this one's a good one and that one's not a good one. That sort of critical mind, which comes. And also making sure that the monastics respect one another as monastics. It's very easy, and I've seen this too, Venerable Children talks about it, that people are very respectful to the monastics and they become monastics and then they kind of lose that respect. Right? Now it's just us. But to actually hold that level of respect with each other as monastics, both keeps our mind pure. I mean, depending on the kind of precepts we have, every day I recite, not to speak faults of Vajra brothers and sisters. And how many times a day do I break that?
That's why Venerable has, from the very beginning, she had said, call each other Venerable.
Yeah.
She said, we're acknowledging our sincere efforts to really live a monastic life. So we get into saying, hey, Chonyi, we've lost something. So that was something that she was strongly supportive of, gentle reminder why we do that.
Actually, I was thinking about sharing that story. I remember, I know you do, back in the days of Dharma Friendship Foundation when I started, she was just children. And I remember she came home from a Western Buddhist monastic gathering once, and she just said, I'm so sad now, she had to be the one to say it, but she just said, you have to start calling me Venerable. It's whatever conversation she'd had at that conference. She said, you have to start calling me Venerable. And some people did. And some people took a while, and some people never did, actually. But what I saw as a newcomer to the Dharma Center, I was quite new, I think, when this came about, was how the quality of respect for her changed immediately. I mean, to me, that was totally visible. Like as soon as people started actually calling her Venerable Children, there was a whole different vibe about how people related to her as a teacher. So it made a big impression on me, obviously. So that point is well taken. Of course, it's a mouthful. Venerable Thubten Chonyi. It's a long, to say that every time takes a lot. But to hold that in mind, and thereby holding that respect for each other, that demonstrates that for the guest community who comes to visit, they also see that is a respect among the Sangha, and so that's another thing to emulate. And it reminds us, as the person, to practice to the best of our ability, right? And there's also, on one of her teachings about this, she also got into a very long thing about the Sangha, not being arrogant, not like, oh, now I'm a Sangha, I'm a front row person, and you have to treat me a certain way. To ever demand that, I mean, that's why it was so sad that she had to ask. It was really sad, but we didn't know any better. What can I say? She knows that. But not ever to demand that respect, not ever to say to our lay friends, hello, you should call me Venerable. Did you know that? You're supposed to call me Venerable. I mean, that's not our job, really. And that, what kind of mind is doing that? We're happy, you call me Josephine, I don't care. It'll do. But to hold others with that regard helps us embody the qualities that we wish to actually cultivate to the best of our ability. And then it doesn't matter how people treat us or whether you get to the front row or they let you eat in the front. So you see how it's a balance, right? Internally, you want to be cultivating those qualities and not, and that gives us a sense of self-respect, that we want to cultivate that too, because it helps us have confidence in what we're holding as precept holders. But at the same time, to expect it from anybody, that's a negative mind. That's just going to get us in trouble. Get what I mean? Yes, Tenzin.
I have a question. But why that when we call the venerables as venerables, but in Asia, lots of when we call the teacher, is called as a teacher. For a shifu is such a teacher,
Yeah.
or we call a lama. Lama is also meaning teacher.
Yeah.
But is there any reason behind it is translated as a venerable?
I don't know. But I definitely, every monastic is called shifu, huh? But she is also their name. It's their last name. They all have the same last name. Sitya.
Ben shi is teacher. Yeah. So we call teacher as shifu.
Yeah. I don't know, but I think if we had the Western Sangha walking around calling themselves teachers, I don't know. But I don't know how it was translated or why. I just know that's what we inherited. And it makes sense to me. I don't know. Common guidelines. Respecting even the robes of ordained Sangha is part of this. You'll be happy and inspired when seeing them, they say. It also says when you see the Sangha misbehaving, don't follow that. But one more thing, you'll see this very much when in the Tibetan communities, they respect this precept very much, that even scraps of fabric, yellow and maroon fabric, are to be picked up, cared for, not stepped over, but actually protected regarded as Sangha robes. So when we're in the meditation hall, stepping on somebody else's dingwa is actually a little bit outside of that, and even stepping over them. So when our rooms are set up so that we're so close together that people can't step without stepping over other people's dingwas, kind of puts us in an uncomfortable position. So if we can get a little path, that's helpful. Somebody else, I can pick up the corner of somebody else's dingwa. That's a good idea. Oh, Tibetans do that. That's very good. I just try to look for a spot. But helpful. Who had their hand up? You. Oh, okay. Okay. Also, respect monks and nuns as they are people who are making earnest efforts to actualize the teachings. Respecting them helps your mind, for you appreciate their qualities and are open to learn from their example. By respecting even the robes of ordained beings, you'll be happy and inspired when seeing them. She does note, if you see monks and nuns misbehaving, do not emulate that behavior. That's not to be done. Okay, common guidelines. Mindful of the qualities, skills, and differences between the three jewels and other possible refuges, repeatedly take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. So we train ourselves to wake up in the morning, take refuge 3 times. Before you go to sleep at night, take refuge 3 times. Anytime throughout the day. And that's a part of what I said earlier, that's part about cultivating that habit of mind to go to refuge whenever things come up. Do all actions by entrusting yourself to the 3 jewels. Same thing. Whether in a happy situation or a sad situation, where you're in danger or in a peaceful place, Whether you're comfortable, keep your refuge at all times. You know, in one practice I've learned from Venerable that helps with the, you know, it's easier for my mind to take refuge when I'm suffering. When things are pretty comfortable, it's easier to let my mind go. But she has the practice and has taught us that to make offerings all the time. So when you're walking around this beautiful property, make that part of your walk, offering the landscape, offering the flowers, offering the moonlight, offering the sunrise, making these offerings in all these ways, so that both brings our mind back to Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. It follows that precept of making offerings to Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, which I think is coming up, and it helps us with our attachment. So it does many things, that practice. If you get in the habit of doing that, then we are again taking refuge a lot. Yeah, that is the second one. Remembering their kindness, make offerings to them, especially offering your food before eating. So many times a day, we could create merit if we're offering our tea, we're offering our water, we're offering our medicines, we're offering our whatever. Mindful of their compassion, encourage others to take refuge in the three jewels. Mindful of the compassion of the three jewels. Encourage others to take refuge. So we're not on the street, we're not proselytizing, we're not putting up billboards that say, when I first came out of that first Vajrasattva retreat, I thought I should stand on the billboard and say, purify now, tomorrow we will die. But I didn't, and that's not how we do it. But we can, and we see this here because so much of our Dharma sharing locally is not so much strict Buddhism, but is sharing ways we can use the Buddhist practices to make life more livable without not talking about Buddha, Dharma, Sangha so much. This is a way to share the Dharma with people, to bring the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha to people who may or may not be open to Buddhism per se or taking refuge per se, but the teachings are so practical and helping people work with their afflictions, helping people overcome their despondency and despair in any way, shape, or form helps. So it's not necessarily encouraging others to take refuge specifically, although sometimes that happens. Many of our Unitarian friends are now Buddhists. They never thought that would happen, but they are. That's their own decision, but we can share the Dharma and encourage others to do the practices. Remembering the benefits of taking refuge, do so 3 times in the morning, 3 times in the evening. I already said that. By reciting and reflecting upon the many refuge prayers. Do all actions by entrusting yourself to the 3 jewels. I already said that. Do not forsake your refuge at the cost of your life, not even as a joke. So we really cherish our relationship to the 3 jewels. I think we've probably all been kind of inspired is too strong. We got a question? Yeah. Let me just say this. When we hear the stories about the terrible atrocities that happened to the Tibetans at the time at the hands of the communist Chinese, and people who did not give up their refuge even at the cost of their life, it was quite literal. That doesn't mean that, I was thinking of Pelden Gyatso a lot, because of Pelden Gyatso, I'm in this seat. As a man who was tortured during the whole occupation, the first part of the occupation of the Chinese communists in Tibet. And then once he was free, made it his mission to go around and tell people what had happened, to really be the witness. He brings the tools with him. He's passed away now, but he brought the torture tools with him to show you what, and the whole time he's telling the story, he's completely, it's just very matter of fact. And from my experience, sitting, just a few feet, probably as far away as I am from Venerable Thubten, the love radiating off of that being was just stunning. It was so powerful to hear him say the things he was saying in a voice that was filled with love. Like, if this practice does that, I'm in. I was still slow, but that was the moment I turned my mind. So when we think about that, it's not that he didn't stop practicing the whole time. He never gave up his refuge. He didn't say his prayers out loud, or he would have gotten hit again, but that holding it internally, it was so much alive. That's a kind of an inspiration that we can cultivate, but it must be cultivated. If we don't cultivate it, we find ourselves in a different situation. We just, we freak out because we freak out. So that's the beauty of calling these, whether we call them guidelines or precepts, of really looking at these as kind of like the mark of how we practice from the get-go. And someday I thought it would be kind of fun to actually take my monastic precepts and map them to these. And because of course we get the detail later in the long list. Okay, what's the question?
When your computer is closed and contains both Dharma material and recipes, how do you treat it? Like a Dharma text?
I think that's up to you. Yeah. I mean, in some ways, we take care of this because it's expensive and we don't want it to break. So there's some respect there, but it's maybe not with a great mind. But, if we think about it as being a holder of our Dharma materials, I mean, those two things can coexist in a computer. Yeah. Any other thoughts or comments? I've talked a lot today. Okay. There is one more talk scheduled in, is that yes? No. There's one more talk in this series next week. We'll talk about the advantages of taking refuge. That's the last topic we'll cover, so we will do one more. After that, we're off for 2 weeks while the Abbey does our Vinaya training course. And then the plan is that on the 25th of December, anyway, the Thursday after the 25th of January, Venerable children will come back to this slot, to the Thursday morning slot, and teach Samsara, Nirvana, and Buddha nature. She aspires to finish. We'll see. Because she'll be here for 8 weeks or so before she goes to Taiwan. So that's the plan. We'll see how that goes. That's just the aspiration, but we'll put that on the calendar and see how it happens. So one more class for refuge. So let's take a moment to digest. And just marvel at the Buddha's teaching and that it has still comes down to us 1,500 years. It's a long time. Actually, in the scale of things, not so long, but human memory is very short. And how fortunate we are to have the teachers and the texts and the translators. And may we use this opportunity to cultivate the causes to become those ourselves, so that we can preserve the Buddha's teachings for a long time for the benefit of beings. Due to this merit, may we soon attain the awakened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their suffering. May the precious Bodhi mind not yet born arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore.